Hi everyone, Caitriona Fay here, the National Manager for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Services at Perpetual. Welcome and thank you for joining us at what is our first ever webinar. We really wanted to do something this year that provided everyone Australia-wide with access to information about our funding processes, and we thought a webinar was a great way of engaging with our stakeholders and friends in every state and territory this year. So thanks for getting along. Just first quickly to run you through how we're going to run today's session. I'm going to really briefly just take you through the philosophy around how we work, what impact philanthropy actually is and what it means to Perpetual. I'm also going to share with you some of our funding stats from the application program last year, including some of the success rates, what made for appropriate success rates, and some of the state and thematic stats. I've got Jane Richmond on the line, who's our Senior Manager for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Services. Many of you know Jane. She looks after our clients in New South Wales, the ACT, and Queensland. And Jane's actually going to run us through the assessment process, and she'll really dig down into what questions we'll be focusing on in terms of our assessment process this year, and how to really get or how to really put your best foot forward with regards to responding to those questions. You'll also notice that you've got access to a little chat box there. I've got Megan Weeks, who's our Philanthropy Services Manager based down here in Melbourne, Victoria. Megan is going to, as much as we can, through the process, if you've got questions, feel free to pop them into that box. And Megan's going to attempt to respond to as many questions as she can as we go through the process. When we get to the end of the presentation, I'll try to address some of the probably more common FAQs and some of the issues that are popping up as we go through the presentation as well. But do feel free to communicate with Megan as we go through and ask any pertinent questions or pressing questions that you might have, because it might be of assistance to everybody else that's on the line as well at the moment. Finally, one of the things that we do want to concentrate on in our Impact Philanthropy program, particularly when we're working with our philanthropic clients, is making sure that we're always providing appropriate feedback on what's happening within the not-for-profit sector. So we'll run a few quick polls as we go, A, to keep you interested, and B, also to make sure that some of the pressing issues that we know you have, we've got some instantaneous feedback with regards to particularly the fundraising space that we can present to our clients on the back of today's presentation. So first off, just some background, a little bit of history on Perpetual. We're obviously one of the largest managers of charitable wealth in Australia. We're almost a 130-year-old trustee company, and one of the oldest charitable trusts we manage is over 120 years old. So we're a long time working with clients in philanthropy. It's very much a part of our business. We manage over $2.1 billion in philanthropic funds, and for a $13 billion financial services business, that probably really demonstrates that it's not just a nice-to-have component of our business. It's core. It's central to who we are, our identity, and how we actually work with our clients. We today, since that first charitable trust was established all those years ago, today we manage over 1,100 charitable trusts and endowments, and quite a number of those trusts utilise what we'd refer to as a single front door process to make decisions about where their distributions are going to go. And that's this Impact Philanthropy Application process that we'll be running through with you this year. $2.1 billion in funds under management that are philanthropic in nature means our clients are distributing well over $80 million a year for the benefit of community. Every single one of our clients, like I said, have the option of using the IMPACT Philanthropy Application Program, but it's also what we use, Perpetual, internally, where we have sole discretion to make decisions about where our distributions are going to go on behalf of those clients. So it's a critical process for us to defend how we make decisions on behalf of those particular trusts. So there's a lot of adjective philanthropy out there. So what does impact philanthropy mean to Perpetual? Well, essentially it really goes back to that fiduciary heritage. And when we're talking about fiduciary heritage, we spend a lot of time thinking and talking about what regulators want and what we're legally required to do. And that's obviously incredibly important in the financial services space. But when we're talking about philanthropy, we think it's really critical to wear an additional lens with regards to thinking about our clients. So when we're talking about clients who might have established their trust 120 years ago, they of course wanted to make sure when they utilised Perpetual as their trustee that their funds would exist in perpetuity and that their trust structures would exist for the benefit of the community for many, many years. But in addition to that, they're obviously pretty passionate about the communities that they've left money for the benefit for. So we feel really strongly that we've got a responsibility to ensure not only are our fiduciary responsibilities met, but also that our clients' desire to actually have impact with their resources is also met. So from a philanthropic perspective, it's about providing our clients, both our current clients and our clients who are no longer with us, with all the tools and resources internally here at Perpetual to maximise their social and environmental returns. And that means ultimately ensuring that they've got access to things like an application program. That means that they've got constant exposure to really quality organisations doing really interesting things for community benefit. So it's probably at this point it might be a good idea to see how many of you are still with us, and we'll pop up a quick poll. And this one, I'd be really interested to know from your perspective what you'd really like to see from a funding perspective philanthropists doing more of. So if we pop up the first poll, you'll see you'll have an opportunity to answer some of those questions. So there it is. So what type of funding would you most like to see from philanthropists? And obviously we've got a mix there of everything from the core to the programmatic. So we'll give you about 10 seconds to answer that, and then we'll pop up the results. And we'd like to share some of these results, obviously, with our clients when we're talking to them about what's really important to not-for-profit organisations. So there we go. It's well, it's pretty tight, obviously, up there. It's not surprising to see the core and infrastructural type funding really sort of leading the charge there. But it's probably much closer than I thought it would be across those four areas. But thank you for sharing those. So impact philanthropy. So what does that actually mean in terms of when we partner with our clients? So a lot of the partnership work that we're doing right now, it's fair to say, obviously structured philanthropy is growing in Australia, and obviously we've got an enormous history of working with our clients to establish charitable trust structures. But it probably doesn't come as a surprise to many of you. In a world where we're probably about to see over the next, particularly over the next 15 to 30 years, the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in human history, that we're getting a lot of clients talking to us directly about bequests and how they can utilise their estates as well to leave important legacies, either for the benefit of the community more broadly or directly for the organisations that you work with. And we also are increasingly seeing clients seeking advice from us around the best approaches to direct gift making as well. So in those instances, again, we internally at Perpetual will utilise our application process to assist our clients in understanding who's doing great work in areas where they'd like to leave where they'd like to make direct gifts as well as leaving bequests. So that advice, I guess, covers everything from our philanthropic trusts and foundations through to actually how we support our clients who more broadly have charitable intent. The education piece, this really comes back to the philosophy, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail in the next slide, but we really want our clients to get an understanding of what's really important to the not-for-profit sector. So that last poll is a perfect example. We want to be able to share where some of the critical investment points might be for working with organisations, and we also want to generate a level of trust for those clients. And that trust comes from essentially them being able to back organisations in whatever it is that they're saying that they need support for to actually shift the dial in the areas that they're working. So we don't necessarily, and many of you have probably heard me say it a lot, we don't necessarily want our clients to be the funding tail wagging the not-for-profit dog. And I do repeat that a lot because it is really important to us that our clients are able to engage in a level of trust with the not-for-profits that they're supporting, so that they can come to understand what's really important from an investment perspective to actually get the job done. So that assessment and matching process is critical, but what's really great about our assessment process is that a lot of our clients and a lot of us internally here in the philanthropy team don't know what we don't know, and we're really happy to admit that that's the case. So there's probably lots of organisations doing really wonderful work and taking different approaches that we're not necessarily across the whole year round. So the application process does give us an opportunity to engage with organisations and identify those great organisations that are entering into really quality work and having really fantastic outcomes in the areas that they're working. And Jane will go more into how that matching process actually works. But finally, for a lot of our clients, impact is about understanding what outcomes not-for-profits are actually having that they're supporting. So we do obviously finish off providing reporting capability, and many of you again have probably been through our light touch reporting process, and that enables us to provide a feedback loop for our clients on how their resources are being used. And we want that to be good, bad and ugly, and it to be an education process. We also use a relatively light touch reporting process because we want our clients to engage directly with the not-for-profits they're supporting to build those connections and to ultimately gain that type of trust that becomes really important in engaging long-term relationships. So I touched on it really briefly, but you know, what are we talking about when we're talking about high-quality organisations? 5 or 6 years ago, Perpetual really looked at our assessment process, and again, Jane will go into it in more detail. But ultimately, it led us to the conclusion that organisations that can demonstrate that they're well-governed, have strong leadership, undertaking activities that have real mission alignment, understand what's happening out in the policy and external market that they're operating in, and have a really clear focus on what their risks are at an organisational level and what it's going to take, both from a culture perspective and a resourcing perspective to mitigate those risks, that they're the organisations that are really having impact on the ground. And that's really, I guess, it really underpins our assessment philosophy. How do we find those organisations for our clients, and how do we assess to ensure that they are the organisations that we're putting in front of clients who might have some alignment around that mission space? So as you can see, there's not very many dot points there that are related to doing great projects. It's really about coming back to that issue of trusting organisations who can demonstrate across those 5 areas that they're doing really well, trusting them to understand what's required from a programmatic or a resourcing perspective to actually get the job done. The impact philanthropy idea doesn't stop just with the philanthropists that we work with, though. It's also about how do we support the broader not-for-profit sector. And if you're going to assess organisations on how capable they are, then we believe fundamentally we've got a responsibility to be investing in all those pieces of the pie that lead to quality not-for-profit organisations. So obviously at one level we're absolutely talking about the $80 million or so that organisations are seeing distributed from our clients, but we're also talking about governance, investing in things like the AICD and their non-profit governance courses, tailoring workshops for the sector around investment responses, etc. And we take that pretty seriously. And it comes from all levels, from the operational component through to actually working with boards directly as well to build their capability to respond. We also believe pretty strongly in sector research. And you would have seen over the years the number of pieces of research that Perpetual invests in around fundraising and fundraising capability. Investment advice, obviously, that's part of the bread and butter of who we are at Perpetual, and obviously we've developed a lot of capability in our capacity to be able to support not-for-profits in investment advice and management. And finally, as I said, it's a big driving space for us at the moment in terms of what our clients are expecting to see, our private clients, and we're also doing a lot of work with our not-for-profit clients, supporting them in their capability to be able to have those detailed charitable bequest conversations with their donors as well. So outcomes from last year, folks. I know that this is probably something that I get asked a lot about, and I'm really keen to share with you all, I guess, what we saw on the back of last year's application program. So we had over 1,400 applications received last year. And what we saw was essentially 35% of those, or 516 applications, were recommended for funding. So 35% of all submissions received essentially scored well enough to be put in front of our clients. And that's why it's really important to us to run these types of sessions, because 65% of the submissions that we received didn't necessarily reflect the type of quality not-for-profit, those 5 dot points that we really needed to see in order for us to feel confident about putting those submissions in front of our clients. Now, 44% of the recommended applications received funding. So again, this is a critical reason why we find these sessions really important. If you were part of that 35% world, those 516 applications that were recommended for funding, you almost had a 50-50 chance of getting funding. So if you get the application form right, if you do well in the assessment process, there is a direct correlation between the quality of what you're submitting and the success that we expect to see. That's really critical for us. We don't want to hide quality organisations from our clients. We want to make sure that those organisations are putting the best foot forward. I get asked a lot about, particularly in Western Australia and South Australia and Tasmania, what success looks like at a state-by-state level. And you can see there why organisations in those particular states have questions around whether or not it's worth their while submitting. We wanted to provide these slides as well for you to make sure that you had a really clear understanding of where funding is going at the moment. Victoria, obviously, we see the most submissions from Victoria and New South Wales, and they are the 2 states that currently do benefit the most, followed by Queensland. And the success rates you can see there for Victoria, for example, does sit at about that 35% mark in terms of successful submissions coming forward. We did do a big push last year in Western Australia to try and get more applications from WA, because we do feel that there is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation with regards to our philanthropic clients. If they're not seeing applications from states, those states go off their, I guess, aren't really on their radar with regards to who they want to fund and what organisations are doing great stuff nationally. So you can see in Western Australia that we made a push last year to speak to more organisations, and we did see submissions coming in, and subsequently started to see a little bit of a jump there in applications being supported. So what I would say to you is don't be disheartened if you're in one of those, I guess, states where we're not necessarily seeing the success rates. We are sitting down with our clients and we're trying to provide them with exposure where they do have the capability to fund nationally or internationally with exposure to organisations working across the country. And I will just say that these results are based on the ABNs that were provided, so it's based on your home office ABN. So that's the state responsiveness there. Here are some of the sector results. I mean, for us, it probably comes as no surprise that organisations working across education, health, and community wellbeing or social welfare are the organisations that are probably having most impact with our clients in terms of success rates. And as you can imagine, a lot of those types of projects could be coded across each other. What I'd really like to draw to your attention with regards to this coding process is that Perpetual doesn't undertake that for you. So we don't look at an organisation and say we think you're an education organisation or we think that you're a health organisation. That's part of how you've coded yourself within the application form. So do think about that really carefully when you're looking at these types of statistics. So where there might be a crossover between health and education, are you better off considering the type of project you're submitting and considering the matching process that we go through to have yourself more appropriately coded as one or the other. So that gives you a snapshot there. Now, one of the really interesting ones there, so animal welfare, for example, we don't see a lot of our structured giving clients, so clients that will utilise the application process to give to animal welfare organisations. But we do have a large number of clients where that's a passion area, and they might actually be giving in a more ad hoc way. But they might be tapping us on the shoulder as their philanthropic advisors to say, hey, how is that organisation ranked in your assessment process? I'd like to go and meet with them, or I'd like to engage directly with them. And that's the same for a couple of areas, arts and culture being one of the others as well. So before we jump into the detail of the assessment process, I'm just going to reiterate that you know, our fundamental beliefs here are that the application process is critical. Get it right and you're up near that 50% success rate. So it's absolutely critical to us. And we encourage our clients to back non-profit organisations. So we ask our clients to be open to absolutely anything except for retrospective funding opportunities and general appeals. We'd prefer our clients who are structured in mentality give to general appeals directly and engage with those organisations who might have a more general capital works campaign, for example, running in a more direct way to get those individual pieces of, say, lab fit outs done via the application process. And that's quite literally so we can assist our clients in getting some real feedback loops going with regards to what they're supporting. One of the big questions I get is, do big organisations do better than small organisations? A strong balance sheet doesn't put you in pole position. The size of the organisation it really doesn't matter. So we see organisations at the big end of town and organisations who are probably at year 2 to 3 who can show some track record with regards to tracking their effectiveness, who do equally as well in this process. So there should be no concern around that. Folks, we might move to the assessment process, but what I would like to do is just pop up another poll. I'd really like to understand, I guess right now, with regards to some of the pressures that the not-for-profit sector is seeing from government funding, with some of the additional headwinds that we're seeing with regards to the low yield environment, and some of the normal challenges that non-profits face with regards to philanthropic funding. I'd like to understand where you feel some of your biggest headwinds are and some of the toughest challenges are with regards to your funding stream. So we're going to pop up a poll at the moment to just cover off on that particular question. So is it competition for funds? Is it issues affecting investments, or is it state and federal funding? So we'll give you again 10 seconds to answer that as best you can, and we'll pop up the results in just a tick. Wait for those results to pop up now. There we go. And yeah, so competitions obviously for philanthropic funds, that's no surprise to us, and obviously we're hearing a lot of feedback from a lot of the not-for-profit clients that we work with and some of the stakeholders that myself, Jane and Megan engage with directly around some of the pressures in federal and state funding. So so thank you for sharing that, and I'd obviously be interested in the other space as well. So if you'd like to share those with Megan, you know, that would be great as well. So folks, this is probably the part of the webinar that you're all really interested in. So I'm going to hand over to Jane Richmond to actually talk us through the details of the assessment process. So Jane, if you're there, if you can run us through the application program and the questions that we assess.
Great, thanks Caitriona, and hello to everybody that's on the line. Now some of you may be familiar with this slide, which visualises the assessment and decision-making process that we go through. The fundamental structure of the application program is a single-year process that allows our clients to make decisions prior to the 30 June compliance period. Applications have opened today, the 27th of October, and will close on Friday the 4th of December. Once received, applications are then reviewed for eligibility. To be eligible, organisations need to either have TCC, have DGR status, or both. From January, we'll begin a process with both internal and external assessors of undertaking an assessment on all applications that are received via their application program. Applications that have been identified by the applicant organisation as being a medical research proposal will, in addition to the standard application assessment process, be reviewed by expert research advisors and assess the efficacy of the research group and quality of research team. We'll then go through a process of matching highly rated submissions with clients who have, for example, identified sectors, demographic, causation areas for support. So as Caitriona mentioned earlier, a critical thing for you to understand is as is our approach with all things related to this application process, we do not make these delineations for you. Within the application form, we use the parameters that you yourself have listed. For example, an arts organisation which is using arts as a means to deliver educational programs might need to think carefully before they identify themselves as being within the arts sector, as opposed to, for example, the education or health sectors. The assessment process, which I'll run through in a moment, is solely based on what you submit. It's not based on my personal understanding of your organisation or what you do. Now that may seem a bit tough, but it's also fair and defendable means for us to put proposals in front of our clients. It also means that if you do well in the assessment process, we'll do everything we can to find support for your proposal until funds available have been exhausted, keeping in mind that we do receive requests that far exceed the available funding amount. There are approximately 170 trusts and endowments that utilise this process to identify organisations to fund for their end-of-year distributions, with many of them choosing to co-fund projects to facilitate maximum impact from shared interests. It's also important to note that this is just a snippet of how this process is utilised. Many of our clients also choose to fund projects or organisations that they independently identify. However, they will often ask these organisations to submit applications via this process so that a formal assessment can take place. Many clients also approach us throughout the year for suggestions on ad hoc distributions, and we make recommendations to our clients based on those organisations who submitted quality applications via this annual process. The great thing about this from a sector perspective is that you don't have to submit many forms or applications throughout the year. You can focus your resources on submitting to us once, and if your application is highly assessed, your organisation will continue to be recommended for funding to our clients for the entire year. Now what we've got there on the slide now is we're just going to I'll run through with you step by step is what questions in the application form we're examining closely in the assessment process and why. We want to be transparent about this process for a number of reasons. Most importantly, there's no reason for us not to be. We want our clients to have access to as many quality applications as possible. We also want them to have confidence in this process, and we want everybody submitting applications to understand the mechanics. You'll note as we go through this that very little of what I'll be discussing focuses on the tell us about your project or program section of the application form. We're focused on finding organisations that understand whether they are having an impact as an organisation. Projects and programs can absolutely assist in doing that, but as can resourcing of key staff, providing functional spaces and equipment, IT support and infrastructure. So we focus the measurement piece on the section of the application form that says, tell us about your organisation. And namely, we assess applications based on responses to 7 key questions in the application form that relate to efficiency, effectiveness, and the 4 pillars of strategy, capability, leadership, and outcomes. For those of you unfamiliar with our application form and haven't had a chance to view it yet, each question is numbered. So in addition to outlining the specific questions that we assess against, I'll also refer to the question number for you to note. I'll now start to go through these in more detail. So to begin with, there are 4 questions that focus on the areas of efficiency and effectiveness. We know that these questions have been a challenge for some organisations in the past, so it's important that you have a clear understanding of what information we require. Efficiency is related to an organisation's ability to demonstrate how they are striving towards a sustainable business model and being efficient with its resources to maximise benefit to the community. We're not going to tell you what these key performance indicators or KPIs should be, as these are your KPIs, they're not ours. All organisations will have different KPIs to measure their efficiencies, but example KPIs could be the use of shared resources, the use of volunteers, and the use of donated goods. Effectiveness relates to an organisation achieving its mission. Once again, these will be specific to your organisation. However, example key performance indicators for effectiveness could be job creation and social return on investment. I've just touched on capability in the last slide when highlighting efficiencies. We view capability as an organisation's ability to achieve its objectives and evidence that it's driving towards a sustainable business model. So, for example, considerations may include whether an organisation's resources, infrastructure and business practices are in place to deliver on strategy. Within the pillar of capability, we assess two key questions in the application form. The first is question 1.7, which is, list no more than 5 key performance indicators that your organisation uses to measure organisation efficiency. And the second question is question 1.8, which is demonstrate how your organisation is performing against the key performance indicators that you've listed above. From a measurement perspective, for question 1.8, we are looking for hard data here, so ratios and figures relating to how you're tracking against your identified KPIs. It might be a good time to also mention here that dot points throughout the entire application form are fine. There is a word count allocated to each question, so there isn't a lot of space for extended narrative. I've also touched on strategy earlier when discussing effectiveness KPIs. We see strategy as relating to how effective the organisation is at achieving its mission. Considerations within this pillar include what societal problem is the not-for-profit trying to solve, and what's likely to stop the not-for-profit from achieving its mission. Within this pillar, we assess 3 key questions in the application form. The first 2 questions relate to effectiveness. So the first is question 1.9. How does your organisation know that it is effective in achieving its mission? List the key performance indicators used to measure organisation effectiveness. And question 1.10 is the second question, which is demonstrate how your organisation is performing against the key performance indicators that you've listed above. The third question, question 1.12, relates to an organisation's understanding of risk, which is list the risks affecting your organisation and accompanying mitigation strategies. A minimum of 3 risks are required. Now, to be honest, this question is generally answered quite poorly, as organisations often shy away from telling us about the risks affecting their organisation, or they only identify funding as their main risk. Risk is an important factor when looking at an organisation's governance, so we ask this question to understand how your organisation manages internal risk and have strategies in place to mitigate risks should they occur. As an example, your main risk could be operational, or they could relate to the safety of clients or staff. The pillar of leadership relates to an organisation's awareness of the external environment, including public policy, government, other organisations working with the sector and the community. Are there political issues that could impact policy? Has there been legislative change? Has your operating environment changed? An example of this could be in the disability sector. We would expect to see the NDIS as a major external factor facing your organisation. And this is something that we've seen identified from disability organisations that have been successful through the assessment process over the past few years. The question within the application form that we assess against within this pillar is question 1.11, which is summarise the major external challenges facing your organisation. Which brings us to our last pillar of outcomes, which is the only question that we assess that is based on the activity or project that you're seeking funds for. We're looking for evidence of realistic, measurable and achievable goals and outcomes, including societal impact. The question that we assess against within this pillar in the application form is question 2.5. What are your expected outcomes? And state how you will measure these. Be careful that you specify outcomes here and not outputs. Please also ensure that you show how you will be measuring these outcomes. For example, if the funding is to support the distribution of 1,000 readers into Year 4 classrooms, the outcome here is not that the readers have been distributed. That would be the output. We want to know what the outcome will be from the students accessing the readers. For example, is it expected that their reading level improves to a satisfactory level? Measurement could then be that the students are assessed on their reading level prior to them accessing the readers and then post. So to recap, the 7 questions in the application form that we focus our assessment on are 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, 1.10, 1.11, 1.12, and then 2.5. Now that's not to say that the other questions within the application form aren't important, because they definitely are. These are just the ones that we focus on from an assessment perspective. A couple of other things to consider. Please ensure that you answer the question where we've asked it. In your answers, please don't refer to above or include external links if we have not requested you to do so in that question. Each question is also quite specific and asks for different information, so make sure that you answer what is asked and that you don't tell us what you want to tell us. By all means, include as much information as you think that we need to know, but also ensure that you've answered the question appropriately. And on that, before you start working through the application form and answering any questions, I recommend that you definitely carefully read through the instructions and guidelines document on our website. Only applications made using the online form will be accepted. Organisations that operate in one state may submit one application for the state in which they operate. Organisations that operate nationally or internationally may submit up to 3 applications in total, provided that each application relates to an activity in a different state, territory or country. Universities, hospitals and medical research institutions may submit 1 application per department, up to a maximum of 3 applications per organisation. Any additional applications received from your organisation above the maximum limit that's allowed will be deemed ineligible for funding. Your application should also be for a one-off grant. Multi-year funding applications will only be considered by invitation from Perpetual and cannot be applied for without invitation. Now, we're happy to answer any questions that you should have at the end, but I'll now just hand back to Caitriona, who's going to provide you with an overview of our partnership grants.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks everyone for listening. Just to probably to close out, I guess, our polls, I'd be again really interested to understand what funding you find it most difficult to secure at the moment. So if we can pop that poll up, I think that closes off this this session on the assessment approach specifically really well. To understand, you know, when we're talking to our clients, you know, where are you finding it easier or harder to actually secure funds across what of those original areas that we asked in the first poll you might value the most. So I can pop up those results now. And yeah, look, not surprisingly, around the core funding, we know it's a difficult conversation to have with philanthropists and trusts and foundations more broadly. Increasingly, I think there's an appetite out there for it. What I'd like you all to be really confident about in terms of your assessment process and what applications you're actually putting forward is when Jane, myself and Megan sit in the room with our clients, we're really directing them to that conversation about outcomes. So we're saying let's trust those not-for-profit organisations to actually understand where their resources are required, whether it's core or programmatic or otherwise. And we really focus our clients' attention on that outcomes question that Jane just talked you through, question 2.5. And we say, look, if your money was utilised to get that type of outcome, would you be happy? So we steer our clients away from talking about whether or not they're purchasing something or whether or not they're being asked to fund staff costs or being asked to fund the electricity bills even, and we ask them to focus in on the outcomes. So what will that help you achieve as an organisation? So it's really critical for us that you guys get that question right as well, because that assists us when we're sitting down with clients to actually be able to share the bigger picture. And outputs are a little bit different, I guess, around that. So the other thing that we just wanted to touch on before we jump into FAQs is the IMPACT Philanthropy Partnership Grants Program, which I know there's a lot of interest and a lot of questions on. The IMPACT Partnership Program, many of you probably already know that we utilise our application process to invite in organisations to apply for a grant of up to $1 million, and that grant can be spread over a period of up to 5 years. And what we're essentially doing to identify those organisations is we're looking at inviting only organisations that over a 3-year period have scored in our top percentile of applicants. So have been recommended for funding for 3 consecutive years in the highest bracket. So if you do that for 3 consecutive years, if you get this application process right for 3 consecutive years, it doesn't matter whether or not we've had clients fund you or not. It's ultimately just about the process of doing well in the assessment. We'll invite you in regardless. And again, that funding, that $1 million, can be used for virtually anything except for retrospective funding. So this year we've had 42 organisations who are eligible, so for that 3 consecutive years have scored really well in our assessment process. 6 of those organisations were organisations that were invited last year and secured support last year. So this year, what that means, we won't re-invite those organisations in. A total of just 36 organisations are invited in to apply for that $1 million grant. People have asked me then, well, what's the success rate? We funded 8 projects last year. Many of you would be aware. 8 projects last year, and we had 42 applicants last year. But really interestingly, we shortlisted 16 organisations. So 8 of the 16 organisations that were shortlisted out of that 42, that list of 42, received funding. So again, getting up to that 50% mark is really critical for us, we think, in terms of making it worth everybody's time and worthwhile. So how did we come up with that shortlisted group? Again, we just put everybody through the exact assessment process. And if you scored at our highest ranking in that assessment process, you were shortlisted, put in front of our clients who had an interest in co-funding, and clients who funded up to 50% of those projects. We guaranteed using Perpetual's discretionary support to fund the other 50% of those projects. So again, doing well in the application process gets you in the door for a partnership grant, and then continuing to do well in that assessment process gives you a really terrific chance of ultimately being funded in the partnership program. So I hope Megan's been able to cover off on some of your questions as we've been going. I know there were a couple of questions that Megs has asked me to have a look at. One is on GST on grants, and essentially we're not licensed to provide you with direct advice related to all the grants that you receive. But the ATO does have a ruling on philanthropic grants that makes it pretty clear if they're not coming with caveats, so if they're not coming with a supply component, that even if an application has been provided and you've provided clarity on how you will utilise the funds, that does not constitute supply. GST is not incurred in those instances. But I would encourage you, given the old saying, when you know one philanthropist, you know one philanthropist, to make sure that you're comfortable with that ATO ruling across any of the grants, that you actually apply for and secure, both Perpetual and outside of Perpetual. I think a couple of the other questions I hope that we've had pop up that have been specific to the, well, how do you demonstrate quality governance, comes back to those questions of, we genuinely think organisations that can speak to how effective they are, can speak to how efficient they are, understand their risk environment and understand external factors impacting on how they're working, are quality, well-governed organisations. So it's really critical that you get those key KPIs down. And look, just so you understand how I direct the assessment team and how I work within the assessment team, and Jane works within the assessment team, and Megs as well, we're not looking to judge you on whether or not we think you should be more effective or less effective. We're assessing you on whether or not you've got effectiveness KPIs, and whether or not you know how you're travelling against them. So you could be doing incredibly poorly as an organisation against some of those KPIs, and you'd still do well in our assessment process, because we genuinely are of the belief that organisations that understand how well they're tracking, who understand how poorly they're tracking as well, are pivoting and are responding to the challenges that they're facing at an organisational level. So do take those questions incredibly seriously. Another one of the questions is around not a lot of room to talk about the project that you're submitting. We understand that, and that's with real reason and purpose. So we want our clients to understand what they're being asked to fund, but we want them to focus in on the outcomes of the project. We don't want them to get lost in the minutiae and detail of line items within budgets or specific cost headings. We want them to understand ultimately what needs to be done and what doing that will achieve from an outcomes perspective. So, you know, I've never had a client complain about the project detail really being too short, and where they will do that, they'll provide us with a tap on the shoulder prior to sitting down with them, and we'll approach you to get additional details. If anything, it's typically, you know, ultimately, the complaints that we have from clients are really, I still don't understand what will be achieved. So it's really critical that you get that outcomes component sorted and really reflective of what you'll achieve. I'll ask Megan just before we sign off to put up the links to our FAQs and our eligibility criteria. Guys, they really are. We're trying to provide you with as much detail as possible in those FAQs and eligibility criteria, down to the application questions that we're assessing, and down to our expectation of what we'll see. So it's really critical to us that you utilise those resources. They're going to be really handy when you go through the process. So folks, look, we'll leave it there. We'll make sure that this particular presentation is up online and available to you to go back to and utilise when you'd like to utilise it, and obviously do make use of the additional material. So big thanks to Jane, big thanks to Megs and the GoWebinar folks, and I hope you found this session really useful. Thank you for taking an hour out of your day to join us on this. I hope it really is reflective of the transparency that we're trying to provide to our assessment process. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time, and good luck with the assessment process. Thanks, folks.